It's March 10th and it's day 11 of Israel and America's war to stop Iran and to undermine the Islamic Republic. On today's episode of the Jewish People's Podcast, we're talking about the hidden 450 kilograms. That's the amount of highly enriched uranium Iran reportedly has buried underneath its complex in Isfahan. It's the detail that raises a defining question for the current conflict. Can Israel and the United States actually locate and reach that stockpile? And if they can't, what does it mean for Iran's ability to reconstitute and rebuild its nuclear program when this war is over? To help us understand this technical and strategic reality, we're joined by Avner Vilan, who for more than 2 decades operated behind the scenes and was part of the effort to slow, disrupt, and undermine Iran's nuclear ambitions. Avner spent about 20 years inside the defense establishment. He was a graduate of the Talpiot prestigious program in the IDF. He's a laureate of Israel's prestigious Defense Prize. And he has developed a deep understanding of how the Iranian nuclear program is structured and the various tools that are used to stop it. Avner has mostly stayed out of the public eye, but we are lucky to hear from him today to get his insight into what is the state of Iran's nuclear program and what are the chances that they could rebuild it and even test a nuclear device when this war is over. Today, Avner serves as the chief operating officer of AI-21 Labs, but he joins us to provide this rare perspective on what the Iranian nuclear program looks like from the inside, how resilient it is, and where things stand as this war continues to reshape the region. Stay with us. Avner, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us. And you're one of Israel's, I would say, real experts when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. It's something you focused on for a large part of about 20 years of service in the defense establishment, intelligence agencies, and working specifically on Iran and on its nuclear program. The attacks that we've seen now, we're in day 11 of the war, really seem very focused on the ballistic missile program, very focused on undermining the regime. There have been some attacks that we know of by Israel and the United States separately together against the nuclear program. But I'm curious to get from you, what is the current, how do you assess where their nuclear program is right now? How much has it been hurt, weakened, degraded, and where do we stand?
Thanks, Yaakov, for having me on this podcast. And I think that most of the damage that can be done from the air was done in June in the 12-day war. Before the 12-day war in June, Iran converted most of its 20% stockpile to 60%. They have about 450 kilos of uranium and 60% enrichment. That's 99% of the way to get the 90% of the enrichment of a nuclear weapon. They had 2 functioning underground facilities in Natanz and in Fordo. They had their weapons group intact, and the facilities and the people working on weaponizations were hit in June. Some of the centrifuge production facilities were also hit back in June. But really, the only thing that is left intact was the material itself, which frankly cannot be destroyed from the air. So this time around, other than grabbing that material, which we haven't seen yet, there is not a lot to hurt in the Iranian nuclear program. So I think that to summarize, they have the general know-how of how to build centrifuges, how to build enrichment facilities. That's not something that you could take away from them. You could damage some of the production facilities themselves. You could damage the Fordo and Natanz, which haven't been put back to production, and I don't think that they will be anytime soon. So I think that the reason that we didn't see a lot of nuclear targets this time around is because there are none that could be hit from the air. They have the material, they have the general know-how, and they have the motivation to acquire a nuclear weapon, because now they've seen, both in June and now, what happens when you don't have it.
Right. So I want to talk to you about the motivation, but just before that, I want to close up this 450 kilograms, or the runaway enriched material. And I saw you wrote about this on X, on Twitter. there's 450 kilo, and you just mentioned it, enriched to 60%, 99% the way. They could jump within days, weeks to get to the military grade enriched uranium if they wanted to, and they had the centrifuges to use. How important it is that we get our hands on this. And also, there's another thing, apparently, like, and you just mentioned this, Avner, you can't destroy it from the air. So, right, you have to put boots on the ground, commandos have to go in. Can you give us some detail? How is it stored? Is it in a briefcase? Is it in a vial? Is it in, like, and if we don't get it, how bad is that?
Okay. So let's start with the second question of, what does it look like? So it's in canisters. So the process is you take the uranium, you take it from the 0.7% naturally enriched uranium, and you put it in gas centrifuges for long times to get that amount. This amount takes years to produce. And at the end of the day, it's UF6 gas that you put. It's in the solid form in canisters that protect it. They, as far as we know, most, if not all of it, is underneath a facility in Isfahan, waiting there. This is where Iranians store their material. And first of all, it's pretty small, so it's hard to hit, and it's a can that is made to protect a very expensive and potentially also dangerous material. So even if you hit a bomb next to it, the can is supposed to take some of the impact. But even if you break the can, then this material, either goes into the air in the gas form, depends on the temperature, or stays there. But then when the temperature cools down, it's just in the solid form that you could just, figuratively speaking, take a broom and swipe it, and you still have the material. So it's really hard to destroy it from the air. So I think that a way to get the material out of Iran, first and foremost, in a diplomatic way. So in case the Iranians decide that they are willing to give it up, that's the best way to do it. But if you do want to take it out, it's like I said, it's in a facility in Isfahan. You need to have a ground force that gets there. This is not something that you do in a few hours overnight. It's a few tens of meters underground. You need to find a way to get in. You need to see, what is it? How does it look like? How much was it hurt in the attacks in June? Yes or no? And then you need to figure out a way how to get it out. Maybe you need to get some engineering tools like shovels or diggers or whatever. So it's not like a special.
It's not like you just fly in Delta Force and pick up.
No. It's more of like
that's not what this is.
It's more of like conquering this facility militarily, securing it, and giving engineering corps a few days of work at least to figure out how they get it out. Not something impossible. I don't think this is like Iraq boots on the ground, so it's not conquering the whole country. You could do it, but it's not like a small scale flying in.
It would mean a substantial force to provide security, perimeter. I mean, we're not talking about, again, quick sweep-ins, fly out, helicopters, that type of thing, which does change it. Okay, but so then to the first point, let's assume this war will end without Israel or America getting their hands on the 450. So, like you said, there's still the possibility of a diplomatic agreement, right? A new nuclear deal in the day after this war. But if we don't have that nuclear deal and the Iranians hold on to retain control over the 450 kilograms, I mean, does that basically mean, because you also mentioned something that I've been thinking as well, is listen, whoever the new Iranian leader is, assuming it's a bad guy, and it looks like it's going to be a bad guy,
at least
then this person is going to make a very simple conclusion. Right. I need nuclear weapons, because if I had nuclear weapons, this never would have happened.
I completely agree. If I were an Iranian leader, this would be my way of looking at things. Keep in mind that you can't take it as is and convert it to 90%. You do need a functioning enrichment facility. Iranians don't have one yet. They had one in Natanz, they had one in Fordo. They're building a third one near Natanz, but it's not operational yet. I'm not that worried about the known facilities, the ones that IAEA's inspectors went to, and this is something that once they try to enrich there, we would know, and then probably a new war would break out. I'm much more worried that now that they understand that they need to do it in a secret way, in a clandestine way, they could take, a gym outside, or a basketball court, a basketball gym outside of whatever, Mashhad, in eastern Iran. Um, don't tell anybody it's an enrichment facility, and now find a way to take at least part of that material and enrich it there. So this is the scenario that worries me most. Theoretically speaking, you would say, well, they don't need the 60% enriched 450 kilo. They could start with naturally enriched uranium, which is not supervised, but that would take them a lot longer. The thing about the 450 kilos, this is stockpile that is capable to produce about 11 nuclear weapons in a matter of days or weeks, depending on how big your enrichment facilities.
I'd like you to explain one more just technical question before we get into the strategic issues. Even if they have the high enriched uranium, so to military grades, so they take this 450, they enrich it more, and now they have enough, I think what's called an SQ, significant quantity for 11 nuclear devices.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're going to then tomorrow have a warhead, right? What do we mean by a nuclear weapon that they might have in the sooner period than until they can actually get a warhead, install it on top of one of their ballistic missiles? What would they have?
Okay, so now it gets to the gray area of what does that mean to have a nuclear capability? Because if I were again an Iranian leader, I'm not necessarily going to get as quickly as possible to a warhead that I could put on a missile, because then it needs to be in a certain form factor and certain reliability requirements. But rather just have a basic test site and explode one in the desert, and now they're a nuclear country. So maybe that's the quickest path, and this is something that, figuratively speaking, again, you don't need like the top nuclear physicist in the world to build. You could do it with high school student knowledge, because you don't need that first explosion to be very efficient. You just need to show that you can, and to show some capabilities. So there is what's called the weaponization factor, which is actually taking that enriched uranium, converting it into uranium metal, forming it to this form factor that you want. Usually nowadays it's a sphere. The first nuclear bomb in Hiroshima was what's called a gun type, which is you take a small mass, you shoot at a big mass, and then it starts. So this is like something easier to do, but less efficient. So if you're willing to sacrifice efficiency and you don't want to put it on a warhead, you can do it a lot quicker than the standard 2-year estimation of a group that knows how to do fine uranium metallurgy and exact detonations and complex neutronics. You do need to have some capabilities, but if you're willing to sacrifice the quality, at least of your first device, you could make some shortcuts that could make it quicker. And also an important thing to realize that uranium leaves traces, and something that IAEAs and even intelligence agencies know how to track. Where it comes to the weaponization group, some of them are some of the things that you need there are just standard equipment. Some of it is dual use. Very little things that are very indicative to that kind of work, and this doesn't leave any physical traces, so you can't come to a place. If somebody enriched uranium somewhere, you could come there, swipe it, and say, oh, there was enriched uranium here. That doesn't hold for the weaponization group. So, even if somebody was working on a weaponization group, a day before,
be able to know so quickly.
Right. So it's a much harder to track. It's much harder to track than.
But I think, like as you said, if the objective is to declare we are now a nuclear power to boost deterrence and to scare off everyone, it would be enough to just detonate something somewhere in a desert or underground, and we declare now we're nuclear, and then pretty much you've created some sort of level of immunity that you did not have before. So it could be that that's what the strategy would be. Okay, so let's now, if we can, go up a notch and look at the operation itself. I mean, you've worked on projects regarding the Iranian nuclear program, but it does seem that we're at this new level of cooperation today between us and the Americans. I'm curious how you see this this type of relationship, how productive it has been, and if the war itself, if you're able to understand, because I'm not sure I'm able to understand, or many people are.
Yep.
What is the objective right now that the Americans want to achieve with this war? I read a great article in The Atlantic the other day. They listed the 9 or 10 different objectives that Donald Trump has mentioned at different points throughout the war. So everyone's kind of figuring out what is it exactly.
I want about a Twitter post about it, so please send me that. So be a good reference. Okay, so let's start with the operational cooperation. Outstanding. You know, this is something that I'm not even sure in the history of wars there was such level of cooperation between two allied countries. I think you know, it's an amazing joint force that brings each side's advantages to the table. Operationally, I'm at awe. And I think that this also signals, if I take the U.S. perspective, and I've listened to what Rubio said and Hegseth said about the model ally that Israel is, that is not just taking U.S. money and taking U.S. protection, but actually creating value for the Americans, doing some of the work. So I think in that respect, this has been outstanding. But that doesn't mean the second question, which is I think more important right now, about the objectives of the war. Because if I need to define the objectives of the war as I understand it, or as I would have decided, as I would have defined it if going into this war, you have really two different objectives that are important, and then you have other objectives that are not as important. First is the nuclear issue. We've discussed this. Iran is too close to have a nuclear weapon. We talked about what it means to get it out, where they're in an agreement to force Iran to give up the material and declare that it's not going to do any enrichment or just take it. The second is regime change, or at least have a more favorable regime. Doesn't necessarily need to have an outside leader. There are some scenarios that now don't seem likely that you would have an emerging leader from within the Islamic Republic that could be better than Khamenei, father and son. So just hypothetically speaking, somebody like Rouhani, who has already proven that he is willing to accept. Former president, has a religious certification to become leader. He's not in the pool right now, but Iran's taking a hardliner approach. But theoretically speaking, somebody like him who would say, "Hey, I'm willing to end this, give up the nuclear ambition to preserve the revolution, to preserve the regime, and do something else, and relieve the sanctions, and we're still going to be the regime, and we're still going to be very bad to our countrymen, and all that civil rights, and it's not good for the Iranian people." But
we're gonna put aside the nuclear.
But we're gonna put aside the nuclear, and we're gonna behave fairly well on the missiles, and not spread terror, etc. So I'm gonna be just another non-democratic state in the region, and we have our values. So I think that is a path that is also okay if we get there. But a regime change, either a completely new leader or new regime, or something.
But if you remember, in the beginning of the war, Donald Trump gave that 2 Saturdays ago. So when it all began, he gave that 8-minute speech, which I was very impressed by. It was actually very coherent. He outlined reasons for this war at this moment, which he hadn't really explained until then. In the State of the Union address a few days earlier, he for the first time did start to explain why they're even considering military action. But then he also was very clear. This will be the opportunity for generations for the Iranian people to seize control, the reins of power, and take over the government.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of fell to the side. But did it fall to the side because of U.S. politics, or did it also fall to the side because that's really difficult to achieve and is unlikely to achieve? And I think that maybe they overreached with the original declaration of that as an objective.
I think I don't know about the likelihood. I think that likelihood. Nobody could really predict revolutions and uprisings. If somebody could, probably the first ones to do it is the regime itself, and they would be able to block it. So I don't know about the likelihood. I think that this is something that, contrary to have like a military target and say, okay, if I drop a bomb at this and this coordinates, then I'm going to hit it and it's going to be destroyed. This is something that you could do things that will enable it to, increase the likelihood, but you can't really guarantee. So this is not a goal for a war that you could say, I'm going to have a regime change and this is how it's going to play out. And I think this is why in the 8-minute speech, it was actually framed in a very responsible manner. We're going to create the conditions for a regime change. And I heard some Israeli officials saying this operation was planned to June, and we actually made it earlier because of what happened in January. In January 8th and 9th, you had millions of Iranians go into the street chanting death to the dictator. The regime was really under pressure. They even brought some militias from Iraq to help protect the regime. They butchered 30 or 40,000 innocent, brave Iranians, and they managed to contain the protest. But it was like the probably the most severe challenge to the regime itself since 1979. And right now, all these people, I don't think their motivation has changed. They still hate the regime. They're staying at home because President Trump said this, Reza Pahlavi said this, and also Bibi said that. So nobody's telling them to go out. I do think and hope that towards the end of the war, there will be a point where the Americans, the Israelis, and Reza Pahlavi would say to the public, now it's your moment. Go out, grab it. And in contrary to January, now hopefully they will also have air support from U.S. and Israel. So if you have Basij or IRGC forces who are trying to suppress these protests, they could be hit from the air. So if we see that, I think that is at least worth a shot, even if it's not successful. That would be like the best chance the Iranian people will have to overthrow this terrible regime.
Are you worried, though, that this all began with the Iranian people, like you said, taking to the streets, those brave people, many of them sacrificing themselves, losing loved ones, and it began with Donald Trump saying help is on the way? And that's how we basically found ourselves, to some extent, in this moment in time. And if this ends with Khamenei Jr., now the supreme leader, and the war ends with Iranian military degraded and weakened, and the nuclear facility still under rubble, and maybe the 450 kilograms not obtained, but hidden there with eyes on it 24/7 around the clock. But the Iranian people, no real change. I mean, what does that do to America-Israeli standing? Does it undermine the credibility of these two countries?
It's a good question. I think it has some factors that can undermine both countries' standing. I think it's too soon to tell. I think one thing that would be safe to say is that this war is not a great success. Because, and going back to the goals of the war, I didn't say the goals of the war were the missiles or the Navy, because missiles are a continuum. We hit them pretty hard in June. Now we hit them harder. If it's something that the Iranian regime would like to rebuild, even if we destroy everything, so we'll take it 3, 5, they'll rebuild it eventually. So I think that the world is watching. It does see few things. It sees that the Israelis and the Americans have a very effective way of operationally using force. probably I wouldn't. I don't think there's a nation in the world who would challenge U.S. and Israel militarily after what they've seen. I think that they are willing to exercise that power, which is a signal by itself. So it's not something that I'm building, but I'm never going to use it. So in that sense, I'm not sure that this was really bad. But if at the end of the day, the Iranian regime is still there, it has its nuclear capabilities, and there are even more hardliners there than before. I don't think that this is a good way to come out of the war. We may eventually.
You know that one thing will happen here, Avner, and that is that the two men who are leading this war, Netanyahu and Trump, they will be declaring victory at every possible stage and every turn on the road, and something else. And I've been telling this to my Israeli friends who don't like Netanyahu, and there's there's a sizable number, but he will now have, we're going into an election here, as you know, right? It might be held early, it might be in June, might be in the end in September or October, has to be held by October. But he now has the best campaign manager who's going to work for him full time. And that's Donald Trump, because wherever Trump goes, he'll declare the victory that Bibi and I achieved. And wherever Bibi goes, we're able to talk about the great relationship he has with Donald Trump. That's a huge electoral asset, even despite the fact that you're right. If at the end of the day it ends with no regime change, and they're weakened, so we have a couple of years now of quiet, and they're not the same threat that they were. And I don't diminish that. I don't take that for granted. Any quiet day in the Middle East is a good day. Grab it when you can. But they're going to turn into a victory, just like they turned June into a victory, and we now see it wasn't as big a victory as they made it out to be.
So I mean, we could talk domestic Israeli politics for a second. I think Israeli public is smarter than people think they are. And you look at the polls, and you look at even before or after October 7th, and the delaying of the returning of the hostages, what's going on now in Gaza. We saw it in June. We're even seeing it today. There were polls just this weekend. A lot of people just have already made up their minds. I think that this next election is pretty much predetermined. We could talk about what the results. We could do a politics podcast. This is my new hobby after Iran. But I don't think that even if Donald Trump campaigns for Netanyahu, it's going to change significantly the results of the elections, because Israelis have been living here for the last 4 years. They've seen what Netanyahu can and can't do. They've seen what his coalition members want and don't want. So I don't think that this. Obviously, they're going to try it, and I'm not saying that it's not going to change anybody's mind, but the last elections in Israel were decided by, if you clear out all the ones that didn't pass the percentage of the blockage, about 30,000 votes. And I think that there are a lot more than 30,000 people who are not content with what the government has been doing in the last 4 years, and that's why I don't think that there's a question.
And the truth is that based on the polls that have come out so far throughout this war, we see that both blocs are still neck to neck. No one has the clear majority. And Netanyahu might have gotten a bump, but the bump is coming from within the bloc as opposed to seeing a movement from one bloc over to the other side. So obviously, who knows how this will play out. Before I let you go, Avner, so just, one last question. On when we think about the region, though, and Iran's diminishment and how it is in decline, this has the impact to really change Israel's security to some extent, right? Mm-hmm. If this does succeed, you have Lebanon, you have the Houthis who have been quiet, you have now the regional Arab states in the Gulf who have been hit by the Iranians. They're not so happy with America or Israel for launching this war, but they now have come under attack from Iran. Are you optimistic that maybe this will lead to a different region, a different dynamic here?
Oh, I'm definitely optimistic. I think that a weaker Iran is a good thing for the Middle East. I think that the entire Shiite axis, and all of the proxies that Iran built in the last decade or so in the Middle East have been defeated, and this is great news. And I think that generally speaking, I think this is very good for the region and good for the prosperity and for the potential to have some new strategic alliances that were not possible before Iran is either weakened or defeated. You know, as Jews, we could always say, what are we worried about next? So you have the Muslim Brotherhood Sunni axis that is worrying me no less than
Qatar, Turkey. We always have what's
yeah. So you know, it's still going to be a neighborhood that probably we're going to need to have a strong army and continue to defend ourselves. But generally speaking, from a regional security perspective, I think we're heading into a better future than the ones that are than what we've got to, and also, you know, we've also learned some good lessons as Israelis. I think October 7th have taught us a lesson that you can't really postpone dealing with your security threats, especially when it's from fanatics who say they're going to exterminate you. You don't fund them. You don't, you know, send them suitcases of dollars and hopefully they'll keep quiet. And it's the same for the Iranians, and it's going to be the same for any new threat that will arise. And I think that the defense doctrine of Israel will eventually change, whether we do it explicitly by writing that doctrine or implicitly of what we're going to do.
Yeah. No, 100%. I totally agree. The doctrine has been changing and it needs to change even more, but containment and suitcases of cash is not what buys us quiet. It's force and it's diplomatic and political will, which hopefully will continue. So Avner, I want to thank you very much for joining me and sharing your insights with our listeners and our viewers, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaakov, for having me. Great that we could reconnect after all these years.
Yes, it is. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. We will be back with more updates on the war against Iran in the days to come. In the meantime, prayers for safety and some quiet across Israel and across the wider region and all over the world for everybody who comes to us. Thank you very much.